talk about a little bit more about nature v nurture and exploring the role of instincts between horses and humans. So we're building on what we spoke about last week, where we talked about instinct and purpose. First, I think the most important thing is we need to start with a definition of the nature and the nurture. And nature is where we're referring to the instinctive, automatic behaviors that both humans and horses are born with. So how they've evolved through millennia, and nature evolves with their evolution and evolves with our evolution. So there's parts of our nature now, because of the way we live and the lives that we have developed, that would not have existed, say, 200 years ago. And it's the same with the horses, particularly when we are talking about our domestic horses. The biggest thing that we share is the survival mechanisms. So they are hardwired into us, both horses and humans. So for the horses, we're talking about usually the 3 F's, so the flight or fight being the main two when we're talking about survival. Because freeze is less survival, because it's usually when they're in a state of they have no other choice. So they're given into the moment that has occurred. And for humans, that flight or fight manifests as an immediate emotional reaction. So when we have that knee-jerk reaction, like I just mentioned earlier, taking a moment to gather thoughts, to have a response, as opposed to immediately going for a reaction. And that, because that's usually going to it's not going to be very receptive. People aren't going to be very receptive to that. Right. So on the other hand, nurture is the learned behaviors. So these are the things that we've picked up from, and our horses, from the environment, from experiences that we have lived, and the way that the horses have been trained. And I use that word in this context because that is the tradition. We are training them, whereas I prefer to come from a coaching and mentoring point of view, even with our horses mentoring. But I'm using the word trained in this moment because that is where most of our horses, domestic horses, have gotten their nurture-based reactions from. So this could be that they are going to be reacting to a specific way a human has dealt with them in the past. So, for example, the legs. So he's never had his legs picked up in a horse. I was going to speak Spanish then. In a way, a horse needs for their legs to be picked up, yep. And it could be a completely innocuous fact that it's because they're small, or it could just be that they've been roughly handled. And these will create responses, and this is the whole part of nurture. And as humans, it's the same. We learn to respond to certain situations due to our experiences in life. So going back to the horses for a little bit more detail. So for horses, nature plays a huge role in their behavior, and their instinctive reactions often revolve around survival, which, like I said, was fight, flight, or freeze. And obviously for the wild horses, this is going to be giving them safety against predators. And it also creates a immediate ability to be present in any moment. So, and I think this is what animals as mammals share, is most animals, when they're asleep or at rest, they can be awakened up on their feet in a flash. Whereas I don't know about you, but it takes me a good 20 minutes to pull myself together. And why is that? That's because we have no predators. We've no need to be that alert that quickly in our lives, but the animals still do. That's their nature. They won't ever not have that. And that's why we get this, we get all wound up about spooky horses or horses that shy. And if we could just take a moment in that instance to say, well, that's nature, take a breath and it will pass. There's no fight there between horse and human. We tend to mask our emotions because we have that fear of being judged. And I think it goes back to that. But if we are aware and are allowed to express our emotions, I think as a society, we would be more emotionally intelligent because we could handle it. We can handle it from others and we could handle it from ourselves. And I think, again, this is a huge lesson that domestic horses can teach us, is that they have, yes, they're diluted, and yes, some of their nature has been stripped away because of breeding and where they are today as evolved animals. But fundamentally, their ability to be present, their ability to switch emotions up and down, as in being hyper aware 1 minute and completely in standing sleep in the next, is something that we should, I think, admire and try to understand within ourselves a little bit more. And with that is the social element. So we all know that horses are incredibly social. But it's a need. It's actually like again hardwired that they are within a herd. And I think, again, as a human being, as our human society, we have ended up isolating ourselves from our need for social structures and social interactions. We spend a lot of time with people, but not with them. And I think if we could get a little bit more rooted in that nature and understand our social conversations within our own society, we would also understand just why horses need to be in their herd environment. So as human beings driven by instinct, going forward about having our own emotional reactions to fear, anger, joy, love, the first response when something happens, just like horses, is our instinct. And it can startle us. It can, and so this is from what you were saying earlier about if we could just allow that emotional spike every now and again. I mean, ideally, you want to be in an emotional wave, because anybody flatlining, I think, is struggling in life. And I think everybody goes up and down. But it's being able to understand those peaks and troughs when they're huge, exactly. But when they go a peak and trough, that's also normal. You know, that's also normal. There is going to be storms. And it's how we are able to manage that emotional changes and understand that we can come back down to neutral and it's okay, as the horses do when they've spooked. I mean, you must have seen this. If you panic when a horse spooks, the spook is longer and bigger. Mm-hmm. If you allow them to run through very quickly their spook, in fact, you'll see them here, if something happens, they may take 3 paces, stop and look back. And if they feel safe, then it's over. But if you're running with them, or if you're holding them tight, they're going to think, oh my God, whatever it was is still coming, even though it now no longer exists. And they're just going to keep going. So our physical instincts, like the fight and flight response, are also automatic. And we also have that social instinct that pushes to connect and communicate with others. Unfortunately, we seem to suppress that greatly. And with all the fact that technology is amazing, I mean, look at you and I here, completely in 2 different worlds almost, and we're having this conversation. So it's great. It has so many positive things. But it also has quite a lot of negative things that come with it, and that isolation, I think, is one of them. Yeah. So thinking about our nurture, while instincts are huge as a human being, nurture which is our learned experiences, also can shape our behaviors over time. So for horses, like I said earlier, the training and conditioning can teach them to trust or not, to respond to cues or not, or change their behavior. Similarly, we as human beings learn how to manage our own emotions and actions based on our experiences. And it's this balance between the instinct and learning that defines how both we and our horses respond to situations. And an extra layer on top of that is the understanding of that balance and understanding when it is out of balance. So building a deep, trusting relationship with your horse means finding the balance between instinct and nurture. So on one side, we have the horse's natural instincts, things we can't and shouldn't try to change. And on the other side, we have their learned behaviors that come from consistent positive training or negative training, whatever. And that is something we can change and should change if it is a negative experience. But where these two come together is where the trust is formed. It is when you understand their nature and allow them to be horses as horses, and understand the nurture and help them through any negative experience or reinforce any positive experience, then that's where the trust is built in the middle. I think as well, just a slightly different subject, but it sort of fits into this conversation, and we will touch on it in the future, is that it goes back to that ticking boxes. And yes, a collection can be beautiful, but a beautiful collection also has to be natural.
Yep.
You can't ask for a collection that is out of a horse's reach, because then it becomes pathological, then it becomes pain. Yeah. Even if it still looks beautiful to the eye, to the outside. To be able them to understand that they have their own bodies it's like, let's say, you know, you and I were walking, my gait, my stride will be a different length to yours. So to say to me, right, Rachel, you have to now walk at the exact same stride as for the rest of your life. Yes, I could do it. Yes, I could manage my body to get used to that. But fundamentally, I will probably be putting my hips under strain. You know, my back would probably start to ache, because it's not my natural collection. Yep. It is a collection that's being forced on me that looks great. I'm still managing, I'm still getting from A to B, but it's not my natural body's way of rhythm. I'd like to just take a minute and talk about our own instincts, and maybe an emotional reaction that impacted on your interactions with your horses. I know we touched on it in our opening conversation. Just about, can you think of a time that you instinctively reacted with frustration or fear or another emotion? And how did that reaction shape the situation? And if you would have not reacted in that way, if you had reacted with less reaction and had a little bit more awareness of the situation, what do you think, or more awareness of your instincts, let's say, yeah, what changes in that moment would be? This is the conversation isn't saying, oh, well, I can't have that instinct, I can't have that reaction. Well, no, it's saying don't have a reaction, have a response, first of all. But it's a bit like the conversation we had earlier. My initial reaction is to be very, very angry. Fine, that will keep in the moment whatever safe, let's, you know, but I need to understand that and then come back with a response. Above all, everything, safety trumps any conversation that you have with any coach with any horse over any situation. Safety trumps it all, right? Adamant about that. But the more you learn, the more that you understand instincts, the more that you understand nature and nurture, the safer you will be anyway in a dialogue that is not out of reaction and more out of response. You will become more safe because you're more aware. They communicate in by degree. Even when you think they are launching at each other, and particularly with the boys, when they are before the final action, there is multiple pieces of communication. And if that other on the other end is choosing to ignore it, then it escalates. The only time I've seen the rise in that sort of anxiety and anger not be natural and more nurture is very diluted, very domesticated, isolated horses that live in stables 23/7. You know, they don't know how to communicate, they don't know how to socialize, they haven't had their needs met as a horse. But horses that have their needs met as a horse will communicate like a horse, and that is by degree. And that goes back to one of our conversations I'm sure we've had many times, in talking about the dial switch on a light. You can dial it up and you dial it down, and even if you spin it quickly, it still goes through all the notches to get from blackout to bright light. No matter how fast you turn it, it's still going through degrees, right? But the ideal, obviously, is not to spin it and go little by little until you get to the light that is enough, just enough for the response that you're looking for. When we're talking about our horses, can you think of a time when you have recognized your horse's instincts at play, and how, if it's been a reaction to the environment? Because even a human is part of their environmental conditions. But if there's another one, and your understanding of this. As we mentor our horses and coach our horses, what we're doing is adding layers of learning, layers of understanding, layers of awareness on top of their natural instincts. This is what I would like people to start thinking about, that nurture is layers of understanding and layers of awareness within the domestic environment that should complement their natural instincts and not be in contrast to them, not be, not a complement and not jarring. You know, it needs to be complementary, it needs to go together. And if we can consistently create that positivity so that every experience is a positive one. Now, it won't be, but our intention should be that we should be aiming for that they understand the positivity of their domestic situation and their environment that they're in. And by doing this, we're going to be showing them that they can trust us and that we're able to nurture their ability to respond calmly and confidently. By opening that door, that communication, and allowing them to communicate, even when it's not going to be going that smoothly, as long as we've got that door open, they're less likely to escalate. And I think this applies also to our own reactions. Often when we are silenced, and sometimes we silence ourselves because we just don't want to face what's coming, or somebody else silences us, and therefore we feel muted, and that makes us angry, and and I've lived this, so this is a real personal story for me, is that when the voice does occur, it's loud and it's angry because you've held it in and held it in and held it in. And what we're asking our horses to do is to hold it in and hold it in and hold it in, and then boof, and then, oh, my horse is explosive, just exploded out of nowhere. Not not really. Not really. So by understanding our instincts and learning new ways to manage them, I think we will build trust within ourselves and with our horses, because that's the other thing. There is trusting our horses and our horse trusting us. But do we trust ourselves? Because that will be sensed. And if we don't, we need to start there. We need to start at the root of why the trust in ourselves is also super important. So I would like to ask you to reflect on your instincts and your horse's natural responses. And it just can, it's going to sound repetitive, but the more that you take this information on board and the more you repeat the observation and repeat that feeling, you're going to notice things that you didn't notice the first time round. And this is what builds the trust one step at a time, that you are breaking it down and breaking it down and breaking it down. And by spending that time in observation, that is when we're going to win. That is when we're going to get the trust back that most of our domestic horses are craving for.